Okay, this program I designed was programmed to compute information for a water utility company based on the information a customer inputted. So at the start of the program I print R for residential, C for commercial, and I for industrial. And this is just for the user to understand what they need to input for the first input coming up. But before we create those inputs, I initialize three variables, one of them being a constant variable. So the first variable is money owed, which represents the amount of money that the customer is going to be billed. Gallons used, which represents the amount of water that the customer used in gallons. And a constant variable called reset number, which has a value of 1 billion, which we're going to need later. So our first input is a string input, which asks the user to enter the customer's code. So they would either enter an R for residential, they would enter in the letter C for commercial, or the letter I for industrial. And so after that we have two integer inputs, one being meter begin, which represents the customer's beginning meter reading, and meter end, which represents the customer's ending meter reading. The beginning meter means how much water the customer used at the beginning of their billing period, and the meter end represents, or ending meter represents, how much water the customer used by the end of their billing period. So the first check we have is if the amount of water they used at the beginning, so meter begin, is greater than the amount of water they used at the end. Now, this just refers to the values itself, not actually how much water they used was greater in the beginning, because if the beginning meter was a greater value than the ending meter, then that means that the meter dial reset back to 0 because it exceeded the 9-digit limit it has. So we set the gallons used, because this is calculating how many gallons they used, equal to reset number minus the beginning meter minus the ending meter, all divided by 10. So we want to first calculate the beginning meter minus the ending meter, and then have that value subtracted by the reset number, so 1 billion. 1 billion minus this value. And so once we get that value, we divide it by 10, because the meter dial calculates in tenths of a gallon. So we want to remove the tenths and have it in whole gallons. If this check was false, if meter begin was not greater than ending meter, then we just go straight to here, where the amount of water they use is just equal to the ending meter minus the beginning meter divided by 10 to get rid of the tenths. So the first check we have for the customer code is checking if the user inputted R for residential, and it also checks if they inputted capital R. So both would give you the same output. We just want to check for R, capital R. So if they did put in capital R or R, then the amount of money they owe is going to be a standing fee of $5 plus $0.0005 per gallon that they used. So that is just one option for residential customers. So if they did not put in R for residential, let's say they put in C instead, then we're not going to go through this check, we're just going to go to this check instead. So if the customer code was C or capital C for commercial, we're going to check how much gallons they use specifically. So in residential we don't really care exactly how much water they use, because it's always going to be one option anyway that we're going to calculate with. So in the commercial branch, we check if the commercial user used 4 million gallons of water or less, then they're just going to have a fee of $1,000. So it could be, if they use 1 gallon of water, then it's $1,000. If it's 4 million gallons of water, it's still $1,000. But if that's not the case, if they use something greater than 4 million, then they're gonna owe $1,000 plus 0.000 or $0.0025 for each additional gallon they used above the 4 million. That's how much they're going to owe. Now, uh, if they didn't enter in commercial or residential, then we're going to check, did they enter in industrial, or did they enter in I or capital I? And if that's the case, we check, like the commercial, we check specifically how many gallons of water did they use. So if they used, if they didn't use more than 4 million gallons of water, then they have to pay $1,000. So it's the same scenario here. So if they used 4 million gallons of water or less, then they owe 1,000. But if that's not the case, if they ended up using more than 4 million, but not less than 10 million, or no, excuse me, if they used more than 4 million gallons of water, but they didn't go higher than 10 million gallons of water, then they just pay $2,000. So if they use something like 5 million, that's between 4 million and 10 million, they're going to pay $2,000. But otherwise, if they did go higher than 10 million gallons of water, then they're going to pay $2,000 and 0.00025 for every gallon that they used above 10 million. So 2,000, the standing charge, plus every additional gallon above 10 million, 10e6 just represents 10 million, multiplied by 0.00025. Now, the next line we have is an else statement from the very first if we had for customer code. So if the customer did not put in R, capital R, C, I, capital I, then they likely put in an invalid entry for their customer code. So if they put in an invalid entry like T or Z or something other than R, C, or I, then we're not going to compute any valid input for them. We're just going to say that they owe $0 and they only use 0 gallons of water because they put in an invalid input for their customer code. We can't check anything. Now we have another error check for the beginning meters and the ending meters. Now, like we said before, the meter dial can only calculate numbers between 0 and 900 million, or 9 digits. It has a 9-digit limit. So if they put something like -3, it's going to be an invalid entry for either the beginning meter or the ending meter, depending on which they put in. Or if they put in something like 2 billion, that's higher than 9 digits, so that's also an invalid input for the meters. So if they put in an invalid entry for either or both meters, then we're going to set the amount of gallons they used and the amount of money they owe to 0 because we don't want to actually calculate anything. Now, after all these error checks and all these input checks, we're just going to display a summary of the customer's information after all the calculations, of course. So we're just going to show the user what their customer code was. So if it was residential, we're going to show R, what the beginning meter reading was for them, the ending meter, the amount of gallons they used, and the amount that they're billed at the end. But in this case, since we're displaying what the meter readings are, we need to have it in 9 digits. So we use this formattation right here to format the beginning meter and the ending meter to have leading zeros in front so that it can have 9 digits. So if they put in 5, it's really 0, 0, 0, 0, and all the way to 8, 5. And we also want to format the amount of money they owe so that we can have no spaces between the $sign, and we can have commas in each time that the money is separated in like thousands. So like 1, 0, 0, 0 or something like that. So let's check some input here. So let's test. We're going to test 2 correct inputs and 1 invalid input. So let's calculate if their customer code was R, so they're residential, and the amount of water they used in the beginning was 444,000,3, and then by the end they used 444,000,135. Then they used, oh my bad, I let me put that again. I must have missed a digit. So we say they're residential. 444400003. So 9 digits. And then by the end of the billing period, they used 444400135. Then this is taking the ending meter, so this number right here minus this number, and this is the amount of money they owe and the amount of gallons they used. So let's check another valid one. Let's check one where it resets. So here they only use 0.8 because technically this is really just like 1 billion and 2, but it's only 5 because it reset. The meter doesn't go higher than 9, so it reset back to 0. And let's check one that's invalid. So let's put in a customer code of Z, which doesn't have, this has no calculation to it because it's not a valid entry, but let's try it anyway. Now, here you can see that the amount of gallons we used and the amount we're billed is just 0, despite putting in valid inputs for the meter readings. Because we didn't put in a valid customer code, it's not going to compute anything correctly.